thanks for these days, because the thing is that I have learned a lot. And it's pretty difficult to be almost the last one, right, after these great presentations. So, well, my name is Israel. I am software engineer at Corologics. Well, I come from Spain. Usually I'm contributing to OpenTelemetry. So I am not a metrics expert, neither a Prometheus expert, right? So maybe there are things that are not like 100% accurate. So please don't, just if you need to tell me something, do it outside or something, right? And yeah, well, also I participate on different community programs, so it's pretty usual. Like you can see me on different conferences and things like that. Usually speaking about OpenTelemetry. So yeah, the things that why this talk. Many things that I will share here in this talk, very likely you know about them, right? But the things that I am usually one of those people, right, who attract the chaos, right, and the problems. And well, the things that many times I have been, well, I was working also on another company before, right, with OpenTelemetry stuff and everything, right? It's like I was like pretty, let's say, excited, right, about the project and everything, right? So I have been like pushing people for using OpenTelemetry. It's not what I'm gonna do today. Don't worry. And the things that sometimes I reject, right, because I forget to tell them some things, right? So the talk today is like a little bit, right, to avoid that kind of things and situations that some people have had in the past, right? Because just of my suggestions, right, about using OpenTelemetry. Next time I will stay quiet. But yeah, the thing is that let's imagine, right? You are a developer or something, right? And you have many applications, right? Some of them could be writing in Golang, other in Python, .NET, whatever thing, right? You also have set up, because you heard something, right, about something called Prometheus and Observability and these things, right, or monitoring or whatever, right? So you know that you have to have that, right? So you set up a Prometheus thing, right? And you also learn about something called OpenTelemetry. So you set up also a bunch of OpenTelemetry collectors to gather many data and everything, right? And well, also you need dashboards, right? It is important because you need to visualize the data, but also you have to provide something to managers. Managers love to see things moving, right, on screens. So it's like you have to do that. But hey, you know that things are not going well, but you are not seeing anything weird in your dashboard, right? Everything looks green, or even it seems that everything is working fine, right? But it's not what could be happening, maybe, right? The things that I'm gonna provide you with a situation that I have seen like maybe 20 times. Something like maybe you have something with a Target Allocator, right, or whatever, something scraping data, right? And well, one day, because of whatever reason, the Target Allocator decide to go sleeping, right? And the thing is that, well, you go to dashboards, right, and you see everything on green, everything seems to look fine. But the thing is that actually you are not scraping anything, right? So some metrics, right, are like saying, oh yeah, everything is going well, but since you are not observing properly your observability infrastructure, right, you are not observing the server, very likely you can be like missing data and things like that, right? And it could be like at some point it's very late for you, right, to notice about these things. So yeah, some problems, some metrics, and many data could be lost, right? And especially it's because when I talk, I usually talk a lot about observability, right? But people are like, yeah, I have my applications, right, and I have some kind of magic that reaches my observability backend, right? And it's especially, well, in the case of Prometheus, right, we have seen these days that people have to do like that instrumentation, right? But with things like OpenTelemetry, where you have automatic instrumentation, that looks like more like magical, right? Like more like a black box. And I think that actually you have to convert, right, the observability stuff like on a first-class citizen, right? So there are many things, right, that could be failing. Like for instance, this presentation. Okay. Okay, so some things that can be going bad, right? Things like backconfigs, right? Maybe there is something that you are configuring, you are expecting it to be properly working, even you are running the collector and it's saying, hey, everything's going fine, right? Not even just you checking the metrics, right? But there are things that could be happening there. Other things like, cardinality explosion that can be doing pretty many bad things, right, on your downstream components. So for instance, currently, right, we have one pull request open by Cyril that I don't know where is it, right? But we are trying to solve some things related to spam metrics, right? To some bad instrumentation, and also, well, things that have been causing us many issues, right? And also even silent problems that, well, you don't know, right, that the instrumentation is broken until you just see that you are not receiving all the data that you should be receiving, right? So something, for instance, that could be happening, right, is like at some point you have a sudden drop, right, of the receiving data. Many people are just checking the value, right, and if the value is like higher than 0, let's say, right, is that they are receiving data. But sometimes it's like that is enough, right? And this is usually something that we have experienced a lot with, for instance, the OpenTelemetry collector operator for Kubernetes, right? You know that one of the features that this operator has is that it allows you to inject OpenTelemetry instrumentation libraries, right, in your workloads, right? But one of the things that sometimes that injection fails, right? And currently we don't have a way to do a monitoring of that, right? So if you want to take a look, we have one issue open. Take a look because the conversation there even is pretty interesting. And yeah, these kind of things can happen, right? Also, during the collection itself, right, we can have other issues like, well, scrapping issues, right? Things like, I don't know, the TLS is not properly configured or something. Also, sport bottlenecks, like, you start adding things to the queue, right? And at some point, the backend cannot receive it because of authentication problems, or some maybe, I don't know, the queue in the backend is also full or something like that, right? You can also have some kind of rebalances things, right? Like when you're using, for instance, the Target Allocator, and you can be missing data there, right? Because while you are creating or are rebalancing the data, the data still floats, right? But also you have some process resource limits and things that can help you, right, to detect things that could be happening, right? So for instance, something that usually is a debugging signal, right, something that you have to take into account is like all the metrics that are related to exporter send and fail, right? We have one per exporter, right? And also things like the resource usage and everything, right? If you are thinking about the Target Allocator, the things are pretty similar, right? Like the collector cannot scrape targets, right? It can happen when you are using that and not just the Prometheus receiver itself, right? But when you are using also the Target Allocator. It can also happen, right, at some point it stops assigning targets. So the Prometheus will scrape nothing, right? And yeah, also it can happen like, it assigns all the targets to one collector just, right? And the rest are free. And also what you just mentioned, right? While you are doing that rebalancing thing, it can be happening that you are missing data, right? Also, well, itself in Prometheus, right? We can be experiencing issues, right? When we are sending data from the collector, not just if we are using the scraping way, right? But also if we are using the OTLP endpoint. And things like, while you are using things like, for instance, Prometheus remote write, it could also happen like you have some kind of lag or even some drop samples, right? Even things that can help to that is the high cardinality on the metrics and things like that, right? Something that can help you is like that metric, right? The scrap samples scrap that will, if your targets are still up, right? That can happen that this metric is dropping, right? Because you are not receiving the data actually, right? And one of the things that the worst failures are not loud, right? As I mentioned before, one thing that we see pretty commonly is like things like everything is green, right? And it seems that everything is working fine, but at some point, for instance, the Target Allocator stops to rebalance, right? And everything shows that it's up, but actually it's not, right? Regarding the OpenTelemetry collector, one of the things that is good is that, well, it's something opinionated, right? So you can configure on different ways, but that is also a problem, right? Because if you don't know exactly how to configure it properly, it can provide you many problems more than benefits sometimes, right? So it's like, usually it can happen that it fails silently, right? So when you need the most the signals, right? When you need the traces or the metrics or whatever, you check and they are not there, right? So we have different kind of metrics, right? Like for instance, those ones that I mentioned before, right, related to the process that can help you to detect an awful memory thing or receiver metrics, right? So in that part, if you are seeing that the asset metrics, right, are close to 0 or something like that, right, and refuse are going up, it's like very likely something is failing, right? Maybe things like the data is not well formed or something like that. And also we have many, right, on the exporter side, like the number of data that we are sending, also things like the queue sizes, right? That is something that you need to take into account a lot. Also, we have that pipeline health, right? That you can check like what's happening inside the pipeline itself, inside the collector. We have that health check extension that until now, if you go and check the components right now, if you check, you will see that we have currently 2 versions of the health check extension. We are migrating from the V2 to the V2 implementation to the V1, right, to avoid breaking changes. But the thing is that it was not reporting properly the health of the different components, right? And this is something that is going to be fixed pretty soon, right? And working on that. So if I broke it, you will notice too. Yeah, so there are different symptoms that you have to take into account, right, depending on your metrics. So things like, for instance, if if the exporter queue, for instance, is rising, right, the number is rising, very likely it's a problem on the Prometheus or in the backend that you are using. Also, it can happen, right, that things like issues with the network, with TLS. So the good thing there is that you can also check, right, the logs and everything, but it's like starting with the metrics that I mentioned can help you a lot, right? Also, things like if you have a pretty complicated pipeline, you can see that very likely if you are using many processors, right, for doing like different transformations and things like that, that is pretty common. You will see, right, that your CPU and memory will rise a lot. And also it can happen depending on the cardinality of the data that you are using, right, that will also happen, right? And yeah, also things like it could happen that, you know, in the receiver you can be happening like misconfigured limits and things like that, right? So the thing is that you should adjust those limits depending on your thing, or even doing some kind of scaling, right? Also, so the thing is that sometimes what happens is that actually is the collector the one that is breaking the thing, right? So Nicolas, that I don't know where he is, right? But the thing is that some days ago, well, actually on the very beginning of October, right? Alert that, well, something was like having, one of the metrics that from the collector was having a high cardinality issue, right? And after a little bit of time, right, we found that the problem is that the collector itself, right, the exporter thing, right, was adding the IP, right? So that was housing a high cardinality thing. It's not fixed yet. The things that I created the PR today, right? So yeah, soon in your OpenTelemetry collectors or not, right? Who knows? But yeah, another thing that we are also starting to see in the OpenTelemetry collector is doing some tuck-fooding, right? The things that yesterday there was a pretty interesting talk about Weaver, right? That will help you to, like, you have one manifest, right? Let's say, and you can generate some you can generate in the SDK that you need, right? You can generate the metrics, right? And it will have the units and everything that you need. But there are also other things that you can do, like just checking that you are not breaking the backward compatibility and things like that. That is something that currently is happening a lot on the on the OpenTelemetry collector, even when we add some tests to avoid that. I think that since that has been a little bit better, right? But there is some work there, like to do more stabilization on the telemetry thing, right? So you can see exactly what metrics are exported by the different components. So it's something that is still open and needs some conversations. But I hope I am pretty excited about this happening at some point. Something that I always recommend people when people are running the OpenTelemetry collector is building a collector health dashboard, right? With just things related to OpenTelemetry collector, nothing else, not about the rest of observability things. Why? Because the things that with that you can see pretty fast the CPU and memory usage for your collector, right? So if at some point the data starts to become weird or something, right, you will notice pretty fast. Things like the exporter queue size and failures, right, and well, also the data that you are receiving and refusing, right. And also having a ratio, right, between what you are receiving and exporting, because sometimes it's like you can see, right, that you are missing some data. I remember having a conversation with somebody who was like, oh yeah, well, my OpenTelemetry collector is working fine, right, and everything. Yeah, the things that they thought that there were some things that were not working fine, but they were not pretty sure about what those things were exactly, right? Because they thought that they were missing data, but they were not pretty sure. So after creating one dashboard, right, doing this comparison, they noticed that we were dropping around the 30% of the data, right? So it's sometimes when you are running things at a scale, it can happen that you don't know exactly that you are missing data, right? And well, actually it was a 30%, it's something big, right? Something even like that, right? So the thing is that something that also why this is important is like, it can provide you right information pretty fast about what's happening, because if at some point your telemetry pipeline dies, you are gonna lose all the data, not just the application data, right? Well, so it's like you are gonna be like totally out. Regarding the Target Allocator, right? Well, the problem that usually can happen, right, when you have just Prometheus on receiver on the collector, right? It will be like it will try to scrape all the service monitors or pod monitors or targets or whatever you are using, right? So the things that the things that with Target Allocator is like it rebalances, right? The load of scrapping, right, between the targets and the collectors. Something that usually happens, right? Things like the allocator stops assigning targets at some point because whatever, right? Maybe because it doesn't have enough resources or whatever. Or maybe, one collector has 500 targets and other just 50 or something. Or maybe you have a pipeline that is not pretty healthy, right? So it is rebalancing all the time. There is also something that happens in some environments. Yeah. So yeah, it's like you have to be like checking, right, all the different metrics that you have in the allocator to ensure the number of targets assigned, right, per collector, to ensure that, well, they make sense, right? They don't have to be exactly the average, right, but they make sense. And also that you are still scraping data, right? This is something I know that I repeat a lot, right, the part about the scraping data, but it's something that I have seen it a lot, right? And also, well, check for sure the logs and everything, right, but with the metrics, we should have many things, right? And also avoid things like, well, when you have these kind of environments, right, you should like avoid run collectors on high volatile infra, right? So for instance, I know things like, let's imagine AWS Lambda or something like that, right, where you are starting and dropping things all the time, because it will like, the target allocator will need to do rebalancing, right, and it will become crazy, right? Here I will go a little bit faster, right? But something that also we have seen a lot of times is like, the remote backend, right, starts going slower, right, or things like dropping samples or things like that, or you are starting to have a high latency, or even silent lag, right? That this is pretty interesting because I remember one situation with somebody that they were having some lag, right? We're sending the data, and they were debugging. They were receiving the data from 10 minutes ago, right? So when they have an issue, actually they were just checking the data from before, right? And it was pretty difficult for them to debug the things, right? So there are also some pretty interesting metrics, right, that you can debug on the Prometheus, right, about these kind of situations. And also, well, you need to, depending on your thing, right, you will need to very likely to tune the queue settings, scale the remote backend ingestion capacity, right, because sometimes it's like we just let the thing by default, or drop or aggregate high cardinality metrics, right, at the collector. So something that you can do it, right? If you notice that something is like wrong because your dashboards are blank, it's too late, right? And usually this is something that I have seen many times, right? That people just go crazy because they see their dashboards blank, right? So the idea is that you should notice about the issue before, right? That situation happens, right? Because your telemetry data went away, right? Actually, it's not reaching or something like that. So just to finish, the things that the big important part is like observe the pipeline, right? Not just the applications. The applications are important because at the end of the day is what are doing the business, right? But also you have to treat observability as a first-class citizen, right? The collector metrics are gold. Check the metrics that are, I mean, if you are running the OpenTelemetry collector, every time that you add a new component, check the metrics that are emitted by that component, because sometimes it's like not all the components are sending exactly the same metrics. For instance, there are some of them, right, that have some custom metrics that can be pretty useful for you. The target allocator also is fragile, right? Because it's like every time that you have a big change, right, in your environment, it's like it has to rebalance everything, right? Remote write will betray you, even if you don't think so. It happens, right? It's like we don't have to just trust the things because they are pretty very well battle tested, right? Because the environments are pretty different, so it's something that we have to prepare. Prepare alerts for your safety, so you can recover pretty fast from things. So thank you. I hope you learned something.
Right. Thank you, Israel. Are there any questions?
Thanks for the talk. Just one question regarding the uneven load. Do you know any ways how you can mitigate that? So when you, for example, have targets like cube state metrics, which export a lot of...
Can you speak loud or something? Because I cannot.
You have targets like cube state metrics, for example, which exports a lot of metrics, and some targets are just thousands active series. And how do you monitor the uneven load, and what do you do with that?
Wow. Could you repeat the last part? Sorry.
So when you have targets that have like 1 million metrics and
Yeah.
targets with like hundreds of metrics,
Yeah.
is the load uneven? How do you monitor it? How do you mitigate it?
Okay, yeah, the thing is that there are metrics, right, that can allow you to tell you exactly how many targets you have per collector. So that part is like pretty easy to see, right? And how to mitigate it is like depending on really like there is something bad in your configuration that is not assigning properly the load between the collectors. So that is the first thing that you need to check. Another thing could be that there are some kind of error, like the configuration, everything is fine, but I don't know, there are some network issue or something like that. I remember one situation where everything looked fine, right? But the thing is that even the errors were silent in the log, right? I don't know why, but the user decided to disable the errors even, right? And when we enable, we start seeing all the problems. And the problems were usually timeouts because of the network, because they were communicating across 2 different clusters, something like that. I don't remember exactly the environment. And yeah, also another thing was related to the certificates, right? They were doing certificate rotation, but they were doing it pretty fast. So the things that when you were starting, right, the collector, it was getting the new certificates. But since it was not getting the data, the target allocator was dropping it, right? So, yeah.
Maybe one more question anywhere? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also get to